For your wonderful picture this morning. It's, I think, a tremendous example, as you said, of the gospel. We had a picture of a seed not germinating, well, germinated but didn't succeed, and how God can come and bring new ground, bring new seed, and bring new life. And that really spoke to me, and I thought that was wonderful. It's lovely to sing too, wasn't it, this morning? One thing I might like to ask Neil, if he can sometimes give me the interpretation of, is the fruit of the mystic rose. I've never quite got that one, but if you get any inspiration on that one, that could be another thing to enlighten us. Anyway, I want to continue. I've been doing a series based on a hymn, Heart in My Mouth. I'll ask if anybody remembers what hymn I've been speaking. Take My Life, yes, by Francis Ridley Havergal. And so we started by looking at that. Take my life and let it be consecrated, Lord, to thee. Spent some time thinking about what the word consecrated means. It means holy. Spent some time thinking what holy meant. Set apart. And then, as I said, taking the natural and turning it into spiritual, or the best one I could really get my grips into, my fingernails into, was take the ordinary and make it extraordinary. I thought that was a really good way of saying a consecrated life. Take the ordinary and make it extraordinary. And then we looked at the verse that says, take my hands and let them move at the impulse of your love. And we looked at how our hands are used for work, to provide for ourselves, to provide for others, how our hands are used to care for people, how our hands are used in worship, as we've been doing this morning, wonderfully, and how our hands are used in creative ways. And we've been thinking about that as we've been thinking about God this morning, that the work of his hands is often what we're seeing, isn't it? And then finally we looked at, are we willing to receive God's response to our prayer, take my hands? Sometimes we want then to have plans for how we're going to use our hands. And we looked at the example of Johnny and how God took her hands, and she can't use her hands anymore, but that's how he's chosen to take her life, to take her hands and use them in his service. So sometimes it can be a bit heart in the mouth, can't it, when we sing, take my life. God's got wonderful plans for us. They might not always be our plans. So I want to continue now in the verse that says, take my lips and let them be filled with messages from thee. And so to start with, I want to use Psalm 66 as a base text for looking at this. And so I want you to help me. I'm going to read Psalm 66, verses 1 to 4 and then 16 to 19. And I want you to help me. In fact, is there somebody who can count? First of all. Okay, Andy. You can count. Do you want to come up here and join? And I want you to help Andy to count as we go through this psalm. And first thing you can help Andy with is, does anybody know what a verb is? A doing word, thank you. We have an English teacher.
I can cheat.
He can cheat, he can read here. I've highlighted the words. So it's a doing word as a verb, and I want you to check out in this psalm verbs that involve using the lips. Okay, I'll give you a clue, there's nothing about eating in there, okay? So Psalm 66, and just to help Andy, in case he misses anybody, if there's a verb that's about using your lips, stick your hand up straight away, okay? Give Andy a bit of a...
Double counting the same verbs.
Oh yeah, as we go through, yeah. Psalm 66, shout. Okay, so that's one. Shout joyful praises to God, all the earth. Sing. You're on it, aren't you? Sing about the glory of his name. Tell the world how glorious he is. Say to God, how awesome are your deeds. Your enemies cringe before your mighty power. Everything on earth will worship you. Yeah, Matt, perhaps. I don't know, we might have to check with experts whether that is a verb or a noun. I'm not quite sure, never mind. Everything on earth will worship you. They will sing your praises, shouting your name in glorious songs. Verse 16. Come and listen. Yeah, no, that's the other end of it. Come and listen, all you who fear God, and I will tell you what he did for me. For I cried out to him for help, praising him as I spoke. If I had not confessed the sin in my heart, the Lord would not have listened. But God did listen. He paid attention to my prayer. I've not counted. How many did we get?
I got 11.
11. I think that's pretty good. Good, thank you. I think you've got the point, you've got the message there, that this psalm is packed with action. And it's packed with action that we do. It's packed with action that we engage in using our mouth. And if I had Vicky here, I would love to have a biology lesson. You know how good she is on biology lessons about God's creation and the wonder of how he's made our lips, our mouth, how he's made our lungs to be full of air, our voice boxes, everything that goes with being able to communicate, to be able to speak out. And then, as Neil lifted his hand, listen. It's another lovely verb that we need to learn. We'll come on to that actually in a bit. We have wonderful ability to be able to hear what's being said as well, don't we? And the biomechanics, the biology, all of that is just absolutely wonderful. And I think God is absolutely incredible, the way that he has made us to be able to receive and also to be able to give. So we receive through our ears and many different ways, through our eyes. But our mouth is very much a vehicle for being able to give. So Psalm 66, just going through it, we get there, the very first word, don't we? Shout. And I love that. Shout joyful praises to God. And it's noisy, isn't it, sometimes? When you look in the scriptures, you see praise, you see worship. And the example that's given there is often very noisy. And it talks about words like shouting, which we're not always quite so engaged in. In the early days of the church here, we used to shout an awful lot more than we do it now, didn't we? Do you remember those days? We used to sometimes, when we were worshipping, we used to stand and we would shout in, as it says here, shout joyful praises, and shout in verse 4, shouting your name in glorious songs. So as we sing, and it's sometimes good to just open our mouths and really sing, letting it all out to God as we sing his name, Jesus. But as we used to pray, in the early days in particular, not so much now, we used to shout together. And actually, it was a wonderful release. I remember times when we would shout and shout, very often led by Mary Seaton. She often set a pathway and we were able to follow, and Tony as well, but Mary had a particular gift, didn't she, of being able to express herself to God, and in a way of doing that, lead us all in her train, as it were, in worship. And I particularly remember times when it had been very noisy and then it went really quiet and God would speak, sometimes speak really intimate, really precious things to us. Sometimes I wonder whether we've become a bit too proper, a bit too acceptable sometimes, and we need to be a bit more exuberant, a bit more abandoned. I was reading earlier this week, 1 Samuel at the moment, 2 Samuel. And there was David. David was coming back with the ark, and he was dancing joyfully. He was exuberant. I'm sure he was also noisy. But another one that we're not so good at these days, letting our bodies flow as we praise and as we worship. And David allowed himself to go in abandonment to God. And as we read there, he was despised because of it. He was despised by his own wife. And without needing to go into it too much, in our early days, I don't know if you remember, we were despised actually by most of the other established churches in the area and by a lot of other people. It's something that you'll sometimes find when God is moving, that is a reaction to the way that God is moving. But David, he wasn't put off by that. He almost said, like, bring it on, didn't he? He said, I'll be more despised, I'll be more abandoned. And let's just open our hearts to be more abandoned to God. Let's not become proper. Let's give ourselves. I know sometimes I used to find that it became a habit and it became slightly hollow. If you sort of feel that that's the only way to really praise God, then it can become a habit and then it doesn't have the same force. But when God comes, and sometimes it takes 1 or 2 people to step out, then as God comes and fills that, then it is wonderful. You know in Scripture that the children of Israel, it brought down walls, didn't it, at Jericho. It can actually have effect in spiritual places as we allow God to move, as we allow God to be glorified. That's the key thing here, isn't it? It says, shout joyful praises to God, shouting his name in glorious songs. So we shout, verse 2, we sing the glory of his name. Morning glory keeps kind of coming up here, doesn't it? Verse 2 then, tell the world how glorious he is. So if we've found out how glorious the Lord is, if God's moved among us and given us a wonderful insight into who he is, then we can use our lips to tell others. We're instructed here to tell others. And what a wonderful thing it is to tell others. I mean, what do you go and tell others? What's the message that we take? Well, if we start with this, how glorious God is, what a message that is to people. What a wonderful thing it is to be able to say to people, this is our Maker, this is our Saviour, this is our friend, and he is glorious. And then the fourth thing it says in verse 3, say to God. So as well as telling others, we're encouraged here to say to God. And it just made me think, what do I say to God? We come to him and we praise, we give honour to his name. Very often we then move into requests, don't we? And I wonder if we ought to spend a bit more time sometimes just telling God, saying to God what we've found out about him. Saying to God how wise he is, how he's handled things, how amazing he is, how gentle he is. As I think of the fruits of the Spirit, which is an expression of God in our lives, there's love, there's joy, there's peace, there's long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faithfulness, meekness, self-control. And things like meekness, sometimes I sit and just talk to God and say, I just love the way you're so meek, you're so gentle. There's all sorts of things that you could say, but you choose not to say, or you say in a way that comes through to us because of your understanding, because of your nature, because of the way you are. And it's very educational to us sometimes just to sit back and think, and then to talk to God and say, I really appreciate these aspects of the way that you are. Yes, you're full of power, you're full of glory, but you're not like a dictator in being full of glory. You're someone who comes and serves, someone who washes feet, serves people at the most menial level, serves us at that menial level. And it's wonderful just to be able to come and tell God what we think. Say to God, how awesome are your deeds. Your enemies cringe before your mighty power. And I think the contrast of that on the cross is just amazing, that, if you like, the cross seemed to be, I guess, in the devil's eyes, this victory. And it wasn't like he was cringing in that way in front of Jesus' power. Jesus almost sort of gave up all of his power on the cross. But in doing that, Jesus demonstrated his power to be able to submit himself to the will of God, and for God to raise him from the dead, and then the enemies cringed before his mighty power. I think it's the power of the resurrection that comes through as the most incredible power in the whole of the world. Verse 4, everything on earth will worship you. They will sing your praises. And I love this. We join with each other in worship and praise. But there's a sense in which we join everything on earth. We say, don't we, let all creation praise. Getting a bit metaphorical, the Psalms talk about trees clapping their hands and all these other things. Creation praises God, and we join with creation when we do that. Creation is groaning because of sin. I'm just so looking forward to seeing a new creation, which I'd love to have seen the creation before the fall, when it was in its full vibrancy. We know creation groaning now and struggling and straining. But the new creation will be wonderful. But even now, I don't know if you've woken up at 4 o'clock in the morning recently, but that's when the dawn chorus is these days. I often wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, open the window downstairs and listen out the back, and it's just wonderful. Don't you love the dawn chorus? And the blackbirds get going, they're like the Mary, leading the other birds in their song. And then once the blackbirds have got going, then the other birds come and join in, some with some lovely melody. Robins and song thrushes and others will join in, some just chirping away as best they can. But it's just glorious to hear that worship of God in the creation that he's made. And that's like with us. We can join in, we can sing. We don't all have wonderful voices, but we can add to the swell of praising God. Down to verse 16. Come and listen, all you who fear God, and I will tell you what he did for me. So first time it was tell the world how glorious he is. Tell the world about God. Sort of almost like out there. But then it comes in verse 16 to say, I will tell you what he did for me. And this is where it gets really personal. Okay, I will tell you what he did for me. And that, I think, is so powerful also in what we tell others. We can be encouraged here to start by telling people about God, his wonder. But then I think what often really touches people is when we tell them something which is personal to us, how God has worked in our lives. And that brings it down to a level of reality for people. And sometimes it's dramatic things, it's glorious things. And throughout my life there's various things to do with cancer which have been really significant. For me, for two of my uncles, dramatic, wonderful healing from quite late stage cancer, and have been dramatic, incredible examples of God's healing power. One of them, my Uncle Les, about 60 years ago. He had blood cancer, leukemia I suppose you'd call it, was on his deathbed, and he cried out, called out to God. He'd been brought up as a Christian, and then he'd married a non-Christian, and he'd sort of backslidden. And he'd got 3 children who were, I think at that stage, I think I must have been about 7 or 8 at the time, perhaps 9. So they would have been like 12, 10, 8, his children. And they knew nothing of God because he'd not told them anything. And there he was on his deathbed, and he cried out to God. And God just amazingly healed him. And what he said to the Lord was, please heal me. I want to go and tell the children what I know and what I should have been walking in. And I want you to give me my family. And he did. God lifted him off his deathbed. He went home. His 3 children came to the Lord and are serving the Lord now. His wife did as well. And God blessed the family. And then my Uncle David, my dad's youngest brother, he had prostate cancer which had spread, and it was all over the place. And this was about in 2002, so 23 years ago. And the church got together and they prayed. And then when he went the next time to go and see the specialist after the next scan, there wasn't a sign of any cancerous cell in his body. He'd been completely healed. And it was dramatic. And God used him for another 20 years after that. So we have these dramatic stories of things that God's done in our lives. And then, for me, going through this last year with the situation with Libby, it's not always the same outcome. But our testimony, this is how God works in our lives. Our testimony is our personal story about what God does in our lives. And our testimony through the whole of this last year has been how tender, how good, how amazing, going through difficult circumstances, God is. And although Libby didn't survive, there's been the glory of God in all that he's done. So, if you like, we don't have to polish up our testimony. We don't have to only choose those things that seem like dramatic, powerful things. All of what God works in our lives is a testimony and speaks to other people of God. So as it says here, I want to encourage you. Tell others of all that he's done for you. Verse 17, it says, I cried to him for help, praising him as I spoke. Many times we get into situations where we need help. We don't always go to the right place to start with, do we? We often spend time trying to sort things out, going to others to sort things out. And here it encourages us in the psalm. I cried out to him for help, went to the right source. And I love this, praising him as I spoke. That if you come to God, it's useful if you come in the right attitude. It's sometimes quite easy to sink into, I didn't deserve this, or negative thoughts about God. And in fact, when it comes to hard things in life, a lot of people kind of take that attitude, don't they? We found that with Libby, that as people heard, there was something that rose up in a lot of people that, how can you believe in God when something like this is happening? It divides, doesn't it? These things, when they come in our lives, it divides people in the way that they think about things. And for many, there's this hard, harsh, and as it says here, cry out to him for help, praising him as you speak. And if you come in that attitude of heart, if you let God build that in you, change you, that you've got a heart which is thankful. In fact, we haven't got this here, but it's another verb, isn't it? That's to do with using our lips, thanking. And I think at the heart of things, expressing our thanks to God is one of the most vital, one of the most important things that we can do. Perhaps second only to this next one here, verse 18, if I had not confessed the sin in my heart. And that's another vital action for us to do, isn't it? That perhaps as we cry out for help, initially it might be just get me through this circumstance, help. But then when we see the depth of our problem, when we start to see the sin that's in our lives, that's actually the most awful hole that we're in. That's the most vital thing that we need help for. And here, it gives us the way that we can move through that. But we need to use our lips out loud, or not out loud perhaps. But we need to confess our sin, primarily to God. Sometimes we have to confess our sin one to another. Sometimes that is helpful to to do that in order to express it, to release it, and to let God come. Because it says it negatively, if I hadn't confessed the sin in my heart, the Lord would not have listened. But of course, turning around, I confessed the sin in my heart, and the Lord did listen. That's the wonderful positive thing, isn't it? That as we confess in our need, cry out for help, all we have to do is just confess it, to say it to God in the right heart. And God comes, forgives, renews, and turns the whole thing around, gives us new life. God, verse 19, it said, God did listen. He paid attention to my prayer. I've only just started scratching the surface of what I want to say. I knew I would not be able to finish. I want to speak about a whole host of other things. I think I should just leave it there, though, for the moment. So perhaps I'll come again. There's all sorts of things about God touching our lips, making us holy. Gossip. Let me just turn you to the very last thing I was going to say. So this is 5 sheets further on. Actually, 2 things, just as a little starter for what. So I think I'll have to do a second one on just this one. In John, when Jesus is talking to the woman, and as I said earlier, when you're talking to God, it's good to say, we love how meek and how humble and how gentle you are. And when Jesus was talking to the woman in just such a different way to the way that every other man that was in that situation was dealing with her, he says, neither do I condemn you. And then a little bit further on, when he's talking to everybody else, Jesus says, I have much to say and to condemn. And just taking the verse at that bit, I'm not going to add the last bit for a few seconds. I just want to focus on this. I hadn't really seen it quite like this, the way I saw it when I read it fairly recently. Jesus had much to say to people and much to condemn. As he was looking around, he could perceive, he could look into people, he could not only hear what people said, but he could see the motives, he could see what was underlying things. And it must have really hurt Jesus as he was living here, seeing all of that. He had much to say and much to condemn. But do you know what the next 3 words are? But I won't. That's what he says. So much to say, so much to condemn. And he won't. He will hold those words and he won't say them. And I think this is just wonderful. That this is the way Jesus is with us. So I don't know how much more I'll be able to say about that, but we'll see. John chapter 12, just a little further on from where he says, I have much to say and to condemn, but I won't. He says this, the Father has commanded me what to say. And so the reason he didn't say things that possibly were boiling, he was a human, he was a man, he could see these things, it was sort of, things were kind of rising up in him that he could condemn people. But he listened to what the Father had to say, and he only said the things that he heard the Father say. So the fact that he didn't say anything is not just his self-control, it was the Father's moving through him. The Father didn't want him to say those things. So he said, the Father has commanded me what to say and how to say it. And I love that last bit too. Something Julie often pulls me up about, how you say things. And it's good to have someone, isn't it, who can pull you up. And she says, it's not just what you say, but how you say them is important as well. So if you've got things rising up, much to say, much to condemn, just think about it. And spend time with the Father and see what he's got to say. It might be a little bit different. Amen.